So let's go ahead and get started with it. You see here, we've got this first slide that talks about applying design hierarchy. As we start to develop and create more advanced designs for clients, generally a client has a purpose or a message that they're trying to get people to walk away with. So the graphic that you're looking at up on the screen there are all different terms and vocab words that we'll see throughout this PowerPoint that are meant to help us get to creating that focal point and that that interest piece that people are trying to come away with. So let's go ahead and take a look at some definitions on the next slide here. Design is often about creating or accomplishing something very specific, right? So like I said, a client comes to you. We just got done doing the postcard assignment. They wanted us to create a very specific card that would get people to come to the event that they are holding. So we need to make a design. We need to pick the right fonts. We need to pick the right colors. We need to have the right areas of focus in the document in order to make that happen, rather than just putting out some snowflakes and then a tree because it looks nice. Well, what was the purpose of that? So we have to have a idea before we start of what the focal point needs to be and what you want people to take away from your design. It should be the most memorable piece of the design. We have a front and a back to this postcard, but people probably really shouldn't remember the back of it. They should remember the front of it. They should remember the colors, the events, the feelings that they may get if they go to this event. Those are all the things we want them to take away when we are applying design hierarchy the right way. So the question you need to ask yourself every time you get done, and even before you start designing something, do people know where to look in my design? Is there something that is focusing their attention there? Is there a color? Is there a certain type of graphic or a piece of text that brings them to that takeaway idea? Those takeaway pieces or those ideas can be emphasized by using the elements of design. And if you're taking a look at the screen right now in front of you, we've got 8 of them that we're going to kind of go through over the course of this next few minutes here, which is going to be space, line, shape, form, texture, value, color, and type. These all come together to create the elements of design. So let's jump through them real quick. Unfortunately, we're not going to watch the video that pops up with this. We're just going to jump right over to the actual definition. So space. What is space? It's the most basic way that we can look at the document you're viewing. There are several different ways to use it. Most people refer to space as white space when it comes to design. White space doesn't necessarily have to be white, but it is going to be the area that's left empty. And most times it needs to be on purpose. So if you're looking at the graphic that is on the right here, we have rows being created, and we also have what is called a gutter. The gutter is going to be between those smaller blocks and the bigger block there. And when used with text, it helps with readability, and it helps focus the viewer's attention towards different things. And there we go. White space is not necessarily white, but it is a solid block of area. Rule of thirds is a piece that comes from the photography world, right? As we take a look at a photo, we are going to break this piece into different sections, right? You got 2 horizontal lines and you got 2 vertical lines, and where those lines intersect, right here on the grapes, on the leaf, down on the out of focus tree branch, and more on the grapes there, those are going to be our focal points. That's naturally how the eye kind of breaks. And this is called the rule of thirds. This is always a good principle to apply to any design. Rather than putting something right here dead center, we're able to use the document now and all of the available space that comes with it to draw attention to a certain area if we use the rule of thirds. The next one is lines. The meaning of a line is pretty obvious, right? They exist in a lot of different things. As we've moved through our programs, we started with Illustrator, we learned how to make basic lines, and then we moved into making curved lines, and then complex shapes. And as these happen, you can see we've got some different pictures that go with them here. We've got direction, we've got weight to line, we've got flow, we've got style. And these are all different ways of moving the user of the document or the graphic online to get them to direct and focus their attention onto a specific area. Shapes, like again, going back to learning Illustrator and talking about how to create these shapes are boundaries created by closed lines, right? We've learned how to create closed shapes, so that's where that kind of comes from. And they come in a variety of different things. We can have these nice, clean, geometric shapes that we're all used to making. We can get in these organic types, which don't necessarily have straight lines to them. We've got infographics and picture graphics, things that help explain stuff to us, right? So these are just circles over here. But if you do this circle over here with a line through it, that has a whole new meaning to us, right? So us as humans, we have a set of visual library cues, and these infographics all fall underneath that. So not only is it a shape, but it also comes with a backstory or a word that goes with it to help explain what's taking place without actually using any words, kind of like a universal language. Form describes the three-dimensional objects, or at least objects that look three-dimensional, right? So if we go back to Illustrator, putting a drop shadow on there, Photoshop, putting a drop shadow, maybe changing the lighting a little bit would get us to create that 3D effect and add more depth and interest to our design. We can apply it to objects, shapes, text. So there's a lot of different ways to use that. Texture is another good one. Texture can describe an actual tactile texture in real objects, or it can be used as like an overlay. It can really emphasize certain areas of your design as well. So if you're looking down here, there's different ways to do it. If you start thinking about the programs that we use, Photoshop and Illustrator, we definitely were playing with textures a lot in Photoshop, maybe when we did our collage project and we did those practice tutorials where we were using the overlay or the blending mode of the layer. We were able to imprint those pieces on top of there to add another layer of depth to our images. Value describes the lightness or darkness of an object. Together with color, value represents the visible spectrum. That's kind of what we work with as designers. Value is easily understood by thinking of a gradient that goes from black to white. So you can see down here, we've got a picture that represents left to right being white to black. And then in between there are going to be the visible spectrum that we can see. This one is based off of the CMYK, and that's where we end up getting our different values of our colors from. Color models, we've talked about this before, but we have two types that we work with the way as humans that we see color. The first one is additive color theory. Additive color theory states that anything that is producing a light, so say your phone, your keyboard, the screen that you're looking at to watch this presentation, that is considered additive color theory. It's based off of red, green, blue. The second way that we as humans can view color is through subtractive color theory. Subtractive color theory is basically the combining of CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. A light is going to hit a piece of paper or a printed object, and it's going to bounce back at us, and it's going to subtract out different pieces. That's why it's called subtractive color theory. So anything that's printed is going to be subtractive. Any light that's coming from, or any color that's coming from an object that's producing a light is going to be additive color theory. So color can be described in several different ways. We've got things such as hue, tint, tone, shade, and then we've got our color wheel that can pick our colors from. Remember, it's very important to know your output when developing documents in Adobe, whether or not it's going to be viewed on a screen or it's going to be printed, because that determines which color mode or color scheme that you'll use when developing a document, whether or not that's CMYK or RGB. Each one of those color schemes use or make different colors. RGB is going to have a wider color gamma than what CMYK can offer to us. So it's important to remember those as you are working through your documents and what the intended output is supposed to be for them. It's also important to remember on the color wheel that different colors react different with the human brain, right? So if we think about reds, we're going to think danger, stop, don't go any farther. But if we think blues and greens, we start to think of calming colors. So depending on what shade of color you choose could be affecting the way that the person is reacting to the message that you are trying to send to them. Right? And then there's these different color rules. So as we start to work with the different Adobe programs, we can break it down, right? We can get it into, if you go to like window, color, most of the programs work this way, window color, and then you can get into color themes. You could get into the swatches panel, you can get into color picker. From those different color options, you're able to get in there and tell it different color rules. That color rule will then tell you 5 colors that fall within inside of that rule that you could use in your document. So if you knew you wanted to make a monochromatic presentation, you could come in there and you could tell, hey, Illustrator, I want to see only monochromatic blues. It would give you a bunch of shades of blue that you could then use into your document that go well with one another. But these are just some other types that go with it and how they look on a color wheel. Color association, I kind of just talked about this a few minutes, 2 slides ago, but we'll cover it again really quick. Is if we're taking a look at these different colors here, it's important to keep those in mind when developing your stuff on which color provokes which type of feeling as you're viewing them. Type is a very important piece that is underlooked by a lot of people. But if we're taking a look here, it's the visual depiction of a language is kind of what the definition is. The typeface can express even more than words. So it's very important to choose the right typeface that goes with the design. I'm not going to choose, I don't even know, like Rage Italic, just because the name alone sounds aggressive when I'm trying to do something for writing like a letter of recommendation. Something along those lines where it needs to be very formal and clean, and it should have a serif that goes with it possibly. You want to pick fonts that represent the mood and the feeling that you're trying to convey with your message. But we've got a typeface. So as you're taking a look, our computer has lots and lots of typefaces that you can choose from. You can even go out to the Adobe font book now and choose different fonts and have them installed on your computer that we don't have on there. But a typeface would be Arial, Times, Rage Italic would be one, Gothic. These are all different names of typefaces. But the font is the entire collection inside of there. So there's styles that go with a font. So there can be a bold, there can be an italic, there could be a narrow. There's lots of different pieces that go with each font face. Every font has been broken into a classification as well. So this is the basic classification chart that you would see. So if you were in one of the Adobe programs and you went to the characters panel, you could sort based off of these basic characteristics that show up. So if you knew you were looking for a very clean classic font, you'd probably want to look at all the fonts that had a serif that goes with them. A serif is this tiny little foot that pops off there on the M, and a new modern clean piece would be that sans serif, means without. And then there's a bunch of other classifications that fall in there with it. So There's other things we can do with type 2 besides simply just picking it and choosing it. We can go ahead and we can apply design to a typeface. What does that mean? Well, there's different ways of adjusting. So as we take a look at the program, you can kind of visualize it in your head. You've got that characters panel, and inside of that characters panel, it starts off with typeface, and then it goes into the font family. You can get in there and choose your bold, italic, that type of stuff. And then it jumps into size. But below that, you've got a bunch of other boxes inside of there that all deal with kerning and tracking and letting the amount of space, that we can get between each line. So if we're taking a look at the examples that are here, kerning is the amount of space that falls between individual letters. So if you take a look at that word kerning there, it has improper kerning being done right now. The amount of space between the K and the E is not correct. It visually doesn't work. So you get in there, put your cursor right between the K and the E, and adjust your kerning. Tracking, on the other hand, is the amount of space between all letters. It just opens it up and it makes it much wider and more airy feeling. So these are things that should be adjusted on a regular basis. And then over here, we've got our line spacing. This is the amount of space between each line of text. And you can see you've got the same amount of text being typed in each paragraph, but they look vastly different with each other based on the amount of space that comes between each line. So that got us through the elements of design. Now we're moving on to the principles of design. And these are going to focus on different pieces. So we're going to talk about the focal point or emphasis. We're talking about contrast, unity, variety, balance, proportions of scale, and repetition as we move through this document here. And the final one we'll end on will be movement. So what is a focal point, emphasis, that type of situation? Emphasis describes the focal point to which the eye is naturally drawn to. So if we're taking a look at this picture here of the starfish and the rocks, we have a lot of repetition taking place, right? We've got all these bluish gray rocks in the background, but then all of a sudden we have this color break and a different shape, mind you, and that is the focal point or the emphasis of this photo. And you'll notice it's not actually in the center of it either, so it kind of starts to fall underneath that rule of thirds situation where it's a little to the right and down from where natural center would be in this document. The last bullet there just says, let's think about emphasis as the main point or primary idea of the design or artwork. Contrast is a great principle of design. The principle of contrast can be defined as the difference in the quality of the elements within the design. In this particular example that we have for you here, we have this green background with the silhouette of this girl, and then we've got the iPod sitting there as well. All three of those are very distinctive different colors, and they all create high contrast areas. High level of visual interest when this happens. Some other things, we can pull some of the elements in right now. We've got an organic shape of that silhouette there. We've got lines being used with the white portion that's there. We've got rule of thirds being used because she's off center and to the left. So there is a lot of different pieces taking place with this to help create that contrast. And as we work through the assignment that's going to be coming up here, it's important that you're able to basically describe why you chose contrast or rhythm or repetition or some of the design elements. You've got to be able to articulate why you've chosen that for your homework that you're going to be doing. So keep that in mind as we work through these last couple pieces here. Contrast can be imagined as a range from low contrast, which we call unity, or high contrast, which we call variety. So let's take a look at some different pieces. Unity, low contrast, have very little tension. They're easy to deal with and generally calming in nature. Variety is going to be this high contrast, energy, It's going to be lively. It's going to be very hard to focus sometimes. So keep that in mind when dealing with your different types there. Balance is the struggle, or a balance suggests that the arrangement of elements in the design should be evenly distributed. But that's not generally the case sometimes, right? If that is the case all the time, that contradicts what maybe emphasis or rule of thirds is. So let's take a look at some examples that we have here of some balance pieces. So symmetrical balance is what we tend to latch onto at first, right? We can take something, divide it in two. So if you're taking a look at the McDonald's there and I fold it down the middle, it's pretty symmetrical. It's not 100% the same, but that would be a very centered design. The next one would be asymmetrical. You're going to have a very heavy side. So left, right, top, bottom. One of them will be very heavy. And then the picture in the middle there, you've got this dark right-hand side, and you've got this light left-hand side, which creates this asymmetrical balance. And then the last one is going to be our radial or circular type of balance. And you can see with this 5-hour energy, it's clearly center heavy with radiating pieces coming out from the center, which make this have a radial balance. Proportion or scale. This describes the relatively size and scale of things inside of the image here. This one is a little challenging sometimes to find when you have to find an example for it. It's not in all the different pieces, but generally this kind of goes back to unity. If it feels good and the scale is right, the proportion is right, then that's kind of how I use it with inside of a design when I'm working on it. It can be achieved with the two pictures that you see there. You've got small dogs and the big dog. They kind of balance each other out a little bit. Or it can be done with different font sizes on a document. So if you were creating a design that didn't have any graphics to go with it, but somehow you needed to emphasize certain points or create what's called a header, you could pick a font that was bigger, bolder, created this emphasis, and then you could have your body text which falls into it, which is much smaller. And then repetition and patterns. Repetition is a principle that is pretty easy to grasp. Repeating an element in your design. Repetition can convey many things, but often represents importance, movement, and energy. There's just some, good examples of what repetition and patterns kind of look like. There's also strong symmetry balance taking place here. We've got these organic shapes. We have it very balanced, right, left, right is looking pretty much the same. And that gets us back to repetition. You've got some repeating elements inside of there. So when you look at a design, no design has just one principle or one element that makes it. It takes a combination of different pieces to come up with the correct design. And then the last piece here is movement. Movement refers to the visual movement on a page. Depending on the context, it can refer to the movement. The eye naturally follows across the page as it moves from the focal point to focal point, or perceived movement or flow as you look through a piece here. I take a look at this piece here and I really like it. There's a lot of things that are taking place. If we start with the elements here, we've got some 3D dimension taking place. We've got organic shapes taking place here with those triangles up top. We've got contrasting colors up top as well. It's super heavy up top compared to the bottom in my sense. We've got these arrows or these triangles that are pointing down that say, hey, you need to look down here at these words. And we've got good typography taking place here. We've got a bold word, so we know exactly what the most important word is there. It's a different color than the background. So there's a lot of things that could be talked about if you had to explain why you chose to emphasize that element or that principle we're talking about. So hopefully you were able to pick up and start to understand and maybe visualize different elements and designs as you start to go through your daily life. That's the goal. That you're sitting at a restaurant and we're starting to think about this. Man, that menu that looks really bad. What's making that menu look bad? Is it the color? Is it the font they chose? Is it the layout? Is it the graphics? What could be better? That's how I spend my daily life, walking around, judging and evaluating everything, and capturing those ideas that look really, really good. A good thing to do. You got a cell phone on you. You like a design. Take a picture of it. Save that, store it, put it in your mental library for later. When you have to design something, you can go back to these library of good ideas that you have found and apply them to your own work. So look for an assignment to follow. It'll be posted on Classroom.